we're with David Cohen. He's a consultant, healer, and psychic counselor from London, England, and we're doing this interview in Menlo Park, California. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
Now, you've come a long way to do your work. A lot of people may not have met you yet, and that's the reason we're doing this interview. So you say you're a consultant, healer, and psychic counselor. How did this first start for you? What were the first inklings that you had some kind of abilities in the psychic world?
Well, I was a local government officer. I had done various other jobs, but I was working with what was then the Greater London Council, which was an organization that ran local government in London, but that was abolished by the then Conservative government, and I had to find new employment.
And about what year are we talking here?
This was in 1988.
Okay.
Actually, the Greater London Council was abolished in 1986, and then I was transferred to the Inner London Education Authority, which was its sister organisation. But that too was abolished, as we all expected it to be, 2 years later. So I was in a position where we knew it was going to happen. So I had to think about what I was going to do in order to take the next step in my professional life. Now, I've been very lucky in my life. You perhaps wouldn't think that, but I always tell people I was born lucky. I was born with cerebral palsy. I had an argument with the umbilical cord when I was born, and it got attached around my neck. And I had a lack of oxygen in the brain as a result, which resulted in the physical amount of damage that you see now. But fortunately, my mental faculties were not affected. I tell people I was born lucky because a surgeon told me, who did various operations on me in the 1970s, that another 30 seconds without oxygen and I would have been born blind, deaf, and never been able to walk or talk. So I always tell people I was born lucky.
So there are some things to be grateful for.
Absolutely. So I haven't let my physical problems cramp my style. I went from two schools for disabled children like myself to do O-levels. I did O-levels in an ordinary college, and then I did the next level, which was A-levels, and then I was lucky enough to go to Cambridge University, which is one of our foremost universities, and all that from a point where in 1973 I had nothing, and within 5 years I had achieved all of that. So from that point, I wanted to give something back to those people like myself who had a disability but had been less fortunate than I had been. After university, I tried law, but law and I didn't agree with each other. And then I worked in the voluntary sector with various disabled organizations as a welfare rights advisor and a policy formulator, and that was really enjoyable. But then I changed to go to the Greater London Council because I wanted to expand my work. So when the Greater London Council and then its sister organization was abolished, I then had a decision to make as to what to do. So then the idea again of helping people with disabilities more directly came to mind. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and so it's in my blood. So I thought that basically maybe I had the idea of setting up an employment consultancy for people with disabilities, people especially people like myself, people who had marketable skills that I could put to employers and as an untapped reservoir of talent, you see.
Good idea. Did you do that?
Well, no, as I tried, as I'm going to tell you, but it failed for reasons which will become ever more apparent. So I had this idea, and I put it to a couple of people whose judgment I trusted, and they said, this is a wonderful idea. Furthermore, you are the perfect person to set it up because you are a Cambridge graduate, and once you open your mouth and employers realize where you're coming from, they'll take notice of you, what you're saying and everything. So I started to make preparations while I was still working in a London Education Authority, and the idea began to grow. And then I had to make a choice. Either I could give up my job, which was going to be abolished anyway, but I still had 18 months to go. And now it was paying me what for me at that point was a lot of money. It's £13,000 a year, which was, I don't know how much it is in American money, but for me at that point it was a lot of money. But I hated my job. I wasn't relating to it. It was just a salary at the end of the day.
I can relate to that.
You weren't being true to yourself.
So on the one hand, it was easy to say, yes, I'm going to give up the job and I'm going to set up this consultancy and everything. But on the other hand, I thought, well, hang on a minute. How am I going to survive financially from the time I leave the job until the time I set up my consultancy? Because I want to run it as a business, so it takes time to set up these things. So how was I going to survive? Now, it just so happened that in the mid to late 80s, if there was a self-development course going, I was on it. I went everywhere. I did various things. And 6 months before all this, I had the idea for the consultancy in May of 1988. But in December of 1987, I was on yet another one of these self-development courses. And my tutor took me aside one day and said that he was going to teach a weekend the following January of various methods of psychic healing and divination, and would I like to come? And I said, of course, this is another self-development course. So I went the following January for this weekend, and I enjoyed what was taught. And one of the things that was taught was something called chakra reading. Now, I'd never heard of these things before. He explained that they were discs. That's how they got their name, the chakras.
Chakras.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that you could tune into them and you could find out about a person and what was going on in their lives and help them by tuning into these things. And I had two partners. We were split into two groups, and my partners were very impressed by what I was picking up about them. I honestly felt, Steve, that I had done it all my life. The rest of the weekend went by in a blur, but it stuck with me. I had done it like all my life, and it felt like I was tuning into a memory, something that I'd always done. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it, but I never thought anything more about it. It was just half an hour on a weekend. That's all. And then I forgot about it. But then 6 months later, when I was setting up my employment consultancy and had this problem about how I was going to survive financially, a strange idea came into my head. I remembered this course that I had done 6 months before, and I had remembered these chakra readings, and this lunatic idea came into my head that maybe I was good at these things, and maybe I could, if I was good at it, then I could offer it as a service, and maybe people will come and maybe they will give me some pocket money. That's all I want, pocket money.
Crazy idea.
A wonderful idea, yes.
So I didn't want to get into this work. I wanted to set up my employment consultancy. That's what I wanted to do. All I wanted was a bridge financially between leaving this local government council and setting up my consultancy. Doing what I do now couldn't have been further from my mind.
Just wanted some pocket money.
Exactly. So then I thought, well, I've got to test this out first. I've got to find out if I've got some talent, you know. So the first thing I did was test it out on various friends. I asked various friends of mine, people I knew from very well to possibly well, whether they would be prepared to act as guinea pigs, and they all said yes. And I gave them readings, and they all said they were very impressed, but I wasn't. I said, hang on, Dave, these are your friends. If they weren't impressed, would they say so? Of course not. You know. So I said, okay, the only way I'm going to find out if I have a talent or not is to test it out on strangers. But how on earth was I going to find any strangers? So what I did was I put it to God. I put everything in God's hands. Always, from the time I was little, from the time I was 6, and now I put to God the problem that I was having. I said, "Listen, boss, if you want me to do this work, you got to send me people who don't know me from Adam, who would be prepared to act, to have readings." So I put out the request, and then within a few weeks, a series of remarkable events started to happen. Like I was in Hyde Park, which is a main park in like Central Park in New York, except it's in London. And I was sitting down on a park bench, and I was reading a book, minding my own business. Next door to me, on the same bench, there was a woman also minding her own business, also reading her own book. And for some strange reason, we put our books down at the same time, turned to each other, and said hello. And then, the next one was on a train, and I was going to Cambridge to see a friend of mine, and the compartment was completely empty, except that there was a woman across from me, and we talked as well. Or the third one I remember was I was in a restaurant, and I was late, I was waiting for a date, and my date was late. And next door, on the next table to me, there was a guy who was also waiting for his date, and she was late also. So we started to chat, and all of them asked me what I did for a living. And a little voice inside my head said, "Tell them you do psychic work." And before I knew what I was saying, that's what I told them. Oh, really? What? They said their ears pricked up, and they asked me what I did. So I told them about these readings. I didn't tell them that I had only learned them for half an hour over a weekend. But I told them about these chakra readings. And before I knew what happened, they said, well, I must have a reading. Each of them said, I must have a reading. So I thought, God, get me out of here. So then I started to make every excuse I could think of not to give them the readings. But whatever I did, they shot me down, and I was forced to give them the readings that they asked for. And that's how I got into this work, because I must have done something right. They then went away and told their friends, and then their friends came, and then then they went away and told their friends. And in the meantime, this employment consultancy, which was so promising, just a few months before, as soon as this other work began, it stopped.
Yes, this is how it works.
I hit an absolute brick wall. Mm-hmm. Whatever I did with regard to the employment consultancy, it didn't work. I was very stubborn. I have to admit, it took me 3 years to work out that God maybe didn't want me to do this employment consultancy. In the meanwhile, this hobby of mine, which I never wanted anything more than pocket money from, grew. And eventually, I, stubborn person that I am, decided that maybe I should do this for a living, and that's what I've been doing since about 1992.
David, it's fascinating how you have talked about asking God that if this was to be what you were to do, the little voice came in your head, if this is what I am to do, bring in the people.
Yes.
God brings in the people. I think this is the mechanical law of cause effect that happens. And then what we have asked for with this little voice comes in, and then we are stuck with the individual need and will of, but I want to do this.
What
and
do we do with this?
In relation, and it is there that we are at a juncture. Which path do we take? The path that God has assigned, or the one that the will thinks it wants to take?
That's right.
So I just wanted to interject that because I think many people can relate to that in some part of their life.
Well, I mean, everybody has crossroads.
Yes.
Kathleen, at one point or another in their lives, and there comes a point of choice where you either stay where you are or you make a radical departure, and it's scary. But I did it, and but it wasn't the first time I had done it. That was the thing, you see, because I let me tell you a little bit more, if I may.
Oh, please.
If people want to understand where I'm coming from, they really have to know what happened to me at the age of 6.
All right. What happened when you were 6?
Well, I had an experience of God at the age of 6. I was in school, and it was break time, 11:15, and I couldn't walk till the age of 7. So at this point, I was still in a wheelchair, and I was in the school grounds. I was waiting for a friend of mine to come and push me to the school sort of a shop where you had kind of chocolate bars and Coca-Cola and stuff. So I was looking forward to that. And my friend was late. He hadn't arrived. And I was on the edge of the school grounds. And this little boy came from the outside into the school, came up to me and said, "Hello, cripple." Now, and that was all he said. He went away before I had any chance to respond at all. And I didn't know what the word meant, but somehow I knew exactly what the word meant, and it completely devastated me. So suddenly I wasn't interested in having chocolates and Coca-Cola anymore. Mm-hmm. And I somehow got through the rest of the day. And I got home, and my mother was home, and I didn't want to say anything to Mum either. I just wanted to be alone with this, and I just felt worse and worse. And it was a Thursday. It was the 26th of June 1963, and it was a late night shopping day, and my mother decided that she had forgotten some things that she wanted to cook for the meal that night. So she went off to do some late night shopping, and my dad was alive then, and my sisters were living with us, but they hadn't arrived home from work, so I could reasonably expect to be alone for at least an hour. And so I wheeled myself into my room, and I got down from the chair, and I got down on my knees, and I began to cry. And for as long as I can remember, I've always felt that there was someone up there, whatever you term someone up there, whether it's a God or whatever. And I just had this feeling. And now I had nowhere else to go. Mm-hmm. I had nowhere else to turn to, you see. So I turned to God, and I said, "Why, God? Why me? What have I done to be born like this? I didn't ask to be born like this." Actually, that's not so, but I didn't know that at the time.
You found out different later.
Yeah. So why me? Why couldn't it have been somebody else? You know, why? Why? And I kept on saying that word, why? And instead of feeling better, actually, I felt infinitely worse. I felt like I was going down this long, dark tunnel, and there was no light anywhere. And I actually physically remember at one moment where all I wanted to do was to die. I felt that my life had no point. either for myself or for my family or for my friends. And the best thing for everybody concerned would be if David wasn't around anymore. And I cried and cried and cried. And there's a story in the Old Testament of Jacob, and when his sons bring his youngest son Joseph's coat of many colors, which is spattered with blood, he cried until he had no more tears to shed, and that's how I felt. And I cried and cried and cried, and then suddenly, I felt this hand on my shoulder, and I turned around as though I'd been shot, because my first instinct was, oh no, somebody has heard me, or mum has come back, or my father has come back, and they're wanting to find out what the commotion is about. But there wasn't anybody there. Not that I could see, but there was this hand on my shoulder, and it wasn't light. It was really firm and strong, and it was really on my shoulder, and I felt it. And with it came this tremendous feeling of peace and calm. And I heard this voice saying, "David, stop. David, you were born disabled for a reason. Remember that some of the greatest people in the history of mankind have had to overcome huge handicaps on their way to attaining their greatness. Remember that Beethoven, your favorite composer, wrote his best music after he became deaf. Mm-hmm. Remember that Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president after whom your school is named, had polio and was himself in a wheelchair when he was elected president of the United States. Remember that Talleyrand, the great French foreign secretary that you just read about, and I had at the time, he had a club foot. And the voice said, you too will be special, and rise above your circumstances to do something really special in my service. So don't worry, for I am looking after you and will always look after you, and everything will be all right." Now, I had no doubt then or now that I was visited by God. I have since experienced guides and teachers, and very, very wise and wonderful people they are too. But the difference with that energy and the energy of these others, you cannot describe it. It's just like, the only way I can describe it is when I'm talking with God and I can feel God smile. A smile fills the whole room. No human being can do that. And that was the turning point for me, because I decided to live, and I decided that I was not only going to live, but I was going to win the game of life, so to speak. And I wasn't going to allow my disability to cramp my style. And I did have the sense, whether rightly or wrongly, that I was chosen, that I was chosen in some way for a special task which God would show me later on. And for 20 years, I never talked about that experience to anybody. It was really very, very private, and I didn't want to share it with anybody. But you see, throughout my life, there have been times when that have shown me that experience didn't happen in isolation. From that point onwards, God and I got to know each other as good friends. Mm-hmm. And that's how I know him, you see. And it was lovely. And a year later, I took my first steps and walked, which nobody ever expected me to do. I got up from the bed one day and took my first steps, and that for me was, it was almost a year to the day since that first experience. And so that was the first miracle as far as I was concerned. And then I went to 2 schools for people with disabilities, for physically handicapped children like myself, or physically challenged people like myself, and then I graduated from there to go to an ordinary college and do O levels and then A levels, and then I went to university. From a point where I had nothing. So throughout my life, I've always had this feeling of being watched over and protected and prepared for something. And
David, that's an amazing story.
It is truly amazing.
Thank you for sharing that. We're going to take a break here. You're listening to the Millennium Cafe. I'm Steve Fryer.
And I'm Kathleen Jacoby.
Our interview continues after this break. This is Aria. And we're back. You're listening to the Millennium Cafe with Steve Fryer and Kathleen Jacoby. And our guest today is David Cohen. He's a consultant healer and psychic counselor. In the first part of the program, we heard your wonderful story and learned how you got into this sort of work, and we heard about your God experience, and that really blew me away because perhaps the people listening, they may wish they'd have a God experience too.
And maybe some of them have had
and maybe some have had that they've forgotten about. So hopefully it'll wake some people up to remember that.
Can I just say, Steve, well, thinking about that, you see, I think I was very lucky. It happened to me at the age of 6, and as a child, it's been my experience that children are very much more able to accept these experiences at face value.
They're more open.
Then if it had happened to me, maybe 10, 15 years later, my intellect would have said, would have questioned it. I had no idea of questioning it. It was so right for me. I knew that I was visited by God. No, I didn't have to share it with anybody. I just knew it.
Didn't Jesus even say, "Be ye as little children"?
Exactly.
I think that's what he meant in terms of attitude.
He said that if you want to know God, you have to be as a child, and
be open. To be open like that.
So I was lucky. Whereas I think if people have this experience maybe later on in their lives, they're more inclined to doubt it. That's my experience.
Okay. Yeah, they wanted to start judging it and writing it off or rationalizing. Let's find out a little bit more about your actual work and how it actually works. I don't know where to start, but tell us what goes on for you when you're doing a counseling session.
Well, the first thing that happens at the beginning of a day is I use a particular invocation, which is from my spiritual tradition, which is Kabbalah, to get what I call from secular space into sacred space, to put everything under God's protection, so that both I and the people I'm working with are under that protective light and umbrella. So that's the first thing I do, and I only come down the tree of life at the end of the day. That's the first thing, and it's hard to actually describe what I do because there is no set formula to what I do. I do what is necessary and what is right for each and every individual that comes to see me. So the two of you could come to see me and you could get completely different work done with you. And the thing is, I'm only a channel for my helpers, my teachers, and upstairs, and God who is behind them. So basically, if a person comes to me and the first thing I do is I tune into them by using something that they're wearing, like a watch or a bracelet, and I'm asking my teachers as well as theirs, what does this person need? They may come here thinking that they want something, which may be appropriate, but it may not. So I have to ask, what is it that they want? What is it that they need, rather than what is it that they want? So they could get healing. They could get a reading with either one of my teachers, Ishmael, who looks at life as it is now, or my other teacher who looks at what their soul's journey has been like, or they could just have a counseling session. It really depends on what is right for them at the time, and I have to tune into that.
Now, you had spoken about the fact that you'd taken the class on chakras,
Yes.
and that's how you worked into this with the idea of looking at the wheels of life. When did the guides come in? Because you obviously have moved way beyond that, and you've incorporated many other things. Did you take more classes, or was it a gradual internal teaching that was happening? Please.
Yeah,
give us-
I believe me, Kathleen. I tried very hard to get to get into classes and training and everything, but everywhere I went, I was rejected, and people said that we're sorry, you seem to be too advanced for the classes that we are running, so there's no point in coming to them. So I didn't go to any. I tried, believe me, but that avenue was closed to me. So I just learned as I went along. When I started the readings, I soon stopped doing the chakra readings. They were just in an opening into the work,
Right.
and then they stopped. And then I had 2 or 3 people who called themselves guides. This is the first time I'd heard the word, and they did readings for a couple of years. But there was always a person that they referred to as the director, who was behind them. And I didn't have knowledge of this director, but they always referred to this person as the director, the person who was actually behind all of it. And anyway, in 1991, in October of 1991, I was in Ireland, and I was having dinner with my girlfriend of then at the time, and I had this tap on my shoulder, and I turned around and I saw this face, which is only this. I've only seen him 2 or 3 times in all the years we've been together, but he said, "Hello, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm the director." So he...
and this was not a real person. This is your guide. This is your guide coming forward.
This is my guide, yes. He introduced himself as Ishmael, and since then, he and I have been the greatest of friends, and he's been a wonderful teacher for me. And since 1992, really, he has been in charge of my everyday welfare and in charge of certainly a major aspect of the work. Although now there is another guide who is responsible for the soul journey. But the difference between them is that, as far as my clients are concerned, is that Ishmael talks to people directly. He uses my voice box and my body to talk to a person directly, so that they have their own relationship with him directly. Whereas my other teacher doesn't do that. He is of a higher level, and he doesn't communicate with them directly. He tells me what to say, and I tell them their soul's story. And if they want to enter into discussion with him, they have to do it through me. He doesn't communicate with them directly.
Now, regarding Ishmael, your sort of daily guide.
Yes.
How would you describe Ishmael? Has he had any incarnations?
Oh,
Is he
yeah.
a group soul? There are a lot of different ways I've heard these spirits described. What do you know about Ishmael?
I know that he's of the Muslim tradition. He was Sufi, and he and I understand each other because we have the same roots. He comes from Syria, or his last incarnation was a long time ago, actually in the 10th century. So he hasn't been down here for quite a while. But he came from the Middle East, and my family. That's where they are from. He came from Syria, whereas my family came from Iraq. So and although he's a Muslim, he and I understand each other from a spiritual point of view. We are on the same kind of spiritual wavelength, so we can really communicate well. And
Now, what would you say to the criticism, I guess, that many people have of talking to discarnate entities, because some people would say you don't know who you're getting or the quality. How have you proven the quality of the guidance you've been getting?
Well, the first thing, Steve, is, when I did this first, I had to be exceptionally careful, because you're right, you don't know who you're getting, and sometimes anybody could jump on the bandwagon. But because of my own experience, which always put God first, okay, I always asked, and I still do, that any person who wants to communicate with me from the realm of spirit can only do so if it is with God's blessing and under His direct and personal protection. So therefore, I know that whoever is coming through, it must only do so under God's protection, so it's not going to be a negative thing as far as I'm concerned. Put it this way, I've known Ishmael now for for 8 years, and I know, as I'm looking at you, that I'm looking at Steve. Okay, you have an energy about you. I know what you look like. I know I can visualize you. Okay, so you get used to the energy of a particular guide or teacher. I know Ishmael like the back of my hand, and I know when he's about. He has a particular energy to him. He has a feel, a fragrance. I know what he looks like, although I don't see him. I know what he feels like, because he has this wonderfully impish sense of humor and sense of fun, and he's a wonderful teacher, and I really respect him. And if you're with someone on a day-to-day basis, as we talk on a day-to-day basis, you get used to them. You know exactly what they're like. So I know he's around, and I know if somebody else is around.
What kinds of things have you learned from Ishmael for your own development?
Oh gosh, where do I start?
We'll just pick one or two major items.
Well, the thing is about Ishmael is that he never really gets fazed by anything. He seems to have an unflappable kind of nature, which is very calming. Because on many occasions I haven't exhibited those kind of qualities, and he's always there to say, "Listen, don't worry. This is the situation. We have it in hand. Don't be concerned." And that is tremendously calming.
Have you ever been disappointed by any of the guidance yourself, personally?
Only once, really. I loved somebody very much once. And it didn't look like that was going to work out, and my own judgment said that this person wasn't going to follow through. But Ishmael always tends to give people the benefit of the doubt until they prove conclusively one way or another that they don't deserve it or what. And he said to me, "No, stick with this person for a bit. I'm sure this is going to work out." But for once, I was right, and he wasn't. Most of the time, I have to tell you, it's the other way around. And he was very upset because of that, because it caused me a lot of pain and aggravation. But it was something that I had to go through, and
people do have free will choice, too.
Of course.
And it sounds like he recognizes that.
Yes.
And works with that. I'd like to hear more about some of the cases you worked on. Is there anything you'd like to share with us on that level?
I am constantly astonished by the power of this work to change people's lives, literally. But the two ways in which this work actually does does operate and gets to people. The first is the initial readings themselves, where my guides don't mince words. Whatever's going on in a person's life, be it terrific, terrible, or all points in between, they'll talk about it. And they'll talk about it from the soul's point of view, and they'll talk about it from the person's point of view. And time and again, I've had people who've really been told hard things about their lives, things that maybe they didn't want to accept, but they did. Because part of them knew that what they were hearing was the truth, and they had to deal with it. They had the chance to deal with it or not to deal with it, as the case may be. Actually, if you want an example, I had someone come just an hour ago who last February was told very difficult things about her life, and she wasn't happy about it.
By whom?
By actually both my guides. Mordecai really, who was the sole person, he really laid it on the line about how she wasn't developing and how unhappy her soul was.
And that was a year ago?
This was in February when I was last here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is October 1st.
This is October 1st, you see. And then Ishmael followed it up, and both of them worked very hard, and my client was not happy, but she thought about it and then did something about it. She actually put into operation what they said that she should, and her life then began to change. And so so enthusiastic was she that she has been a very good publicity agent for yours truly ever since. Because I've been here, and I've been here now a week, and half of the people who have come here to see me have been recommended by this person.
So this is, if someone comes here to you to expecting love and light and angels and things like that, they're in for a surprise. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they might get that if that's where it's appropriate.
If that's where they are, I mean, for example, this lady who had such a negative experience in February, she came back here before you arrived and was told that, she was doing really well, and that, she should keep up the good work, and they patted her on the back, and she accepted that because she knew it was right. So whatever is going on in a person's life, they will deal with it, and it's as important, and I want to stress this, it's as important sometimes for a person to know that they're doing things right, as it is to know that their life is a total mess in a disaster area, and they need to do something about it. So whatever's going on and whatever is appropriate, they'll talk about it.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is you get the straight scoop when you come to visit David and Ishmael. And many times psychic readings will be very fluffy and light, and all is wonderful, and very little truth-telling goes on. And sometimes that's what people need. In fact, probably most of the time we need to have a stern hand and to get us back on track.
Or a loving pat, depending where we are.
Or the third alternative is a stern hand administered with love.
Yes.
It's called tough love, isn't it?
Which would be what a good parent would do.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Yes.
That's what it's about.
Which most of us probably haven't experienced much of.
I'm privileged to do this work. It's tremendously powerful, and the great thing about it is it's movable. You can take it anywhere, and people understand it in any language, and it's wonderful.
I also have a very strong feeling about you that you're never going to be allowed to get pig-headed. If you become too inflated, your guidance will be as honest and direct with you as guidance is with everyone else. You're getting a pat on the back as you need it, and you're also told who's in charge here.
I'm not in charge here.
Which-
God is in charge here, and the guys are just working through that force. So even they're not in charge here. God is in charge here, and I'm just the physical instrument of that. That's all.
Well, that brings up a question I had earlier and wanted to ask. Since you had this God experience when you were 6, and now you work through Ishmael and another guide who I guess you wouldn't call him all of God. Why can't you just work with all of God all the time? Why do you need these sort of intermediaries to be able to do your work?
Let me say, Steve, I'm in absolute agreement with you. The whole tenor of your question is that we should go to the top being. Why go to lieutenants when you can go to the general? And I absolutely agree with that, and that's what I do. I want to tell you absolutely that when I need something, when I'm really down and stuff like that, I talk to Ishmael. Yeah, sure. Mordecai not so much, because he's not in that kind. He's not personal in that sense. Mm-hmm. But when I want something, when I need something, and when I need help, it's not Ishmael that I turn to. It's always been and always will be the God force that I turn to. And it's an ambition of mine to run a course of some kind with the title that you can talk with God. And some person wrote a book called Conversations with God, which I haven't read.
That was Neil Donald Walsh.
Yes.
I interviewed him when the book first came out.
I don't tend to read spiritual books unless I'm absolutely drawn to them. But I know this person wrote this book, and also in England there's a lady called Eileen Caddy who runs the Findhorn community,
right.
And she's written books of that nature. So I absolutely accept your premise that we should talk with God, and we should not talk with guides. And but the problem is that God is God. And God is, there's an old Kabbalistic saying that God's place is the world, but the world is not God's place. So the reason why people find it more comfortable to talk to guides is that they are human. You can associate them with them more easily than you can just the how do you describe the indescribable? You can't.
Are you saying it's too overwhelming?
Yes. So that's why people find it more comfortable to think of teachers who maybe are human like themselves, but know a bit more about.
But they don't have a body to worry about, and they're in the heavenly realms. The guides are.
Yes, but they're still human beings.
They've had the experience.
That's right.
Yeah. So they know.
And so it's
about.
easier for people who have no conception that God can be a part of their lives, is really interested in them, loves them to bits, wants the best for them. If they don't understand that, if they have had no experience of that, then it's easier for them to talk to guides. And God understands that. That's why He uses teachers as channels.
That's the whole idea behind a Jesus, for instance. It's the intermediary because the person cannot go directly. They don't believe they can go directly, even though they can go directly.
Precisely.
And
they can go directly.
Of course they can.
And it's a principle of even all the major religions that they can go directly.
Direct cognition is, of course, the best of all worlds.
Precisely.
But as you are saying, when you counsel people, when you work with them, you don't know where they come from in their own background. And if they come from a place where God in their mind is a very negative thing,
yes, which
they
could
would be
yes.
They would be in utter fear.
Yes.
But Ishmael is not known to them, and Ishmael becomes a personal emissary of light.
Yes, and in many cases a friend, because again, I must be doing something right, because the same people tend to come back, and they value his help and guidance. So and they really like the guy, which is he's a very personable kind of guy. He talks their language, and so it's easier to understand that.
So in a way, it's God personalized in a way that you and your clients can understand and deal with more directly and more easily.
I don't have to understand it or deal with it. because I know what the truth of the matter is. But for my clients to understand it and relate to it, it is perhaps easier for them to associate with the human being than it is with the God force. For me, it's the God force all day, every day, permanently.
Now, you mentioned that you might be starting a course to show people how to get in touch with the God force.
Yes, it's an ambition of mine. I have to work on it.
Well, just just off the top of your head for our listeners in a minute or two, what advice could you give in regards to starting that process? How could we start to do that on an individual basis?
Well, I can do no better than quote the Master Jesus, who said, "Ask and ye shall receive, and knock and the door shall be opened unto you." And a lot of people are scared to do that, because the problem that people have is once you have a connection with God, then it'll lead inexorably to a moment of choice. Are you going to be committed? Are you asking God to come into partnership with you? You know, that happened to me at the age of 6, but I was, and I accepted it completely. But I knew as an adult that I had to make that commitment again as an adult, that I wanted God to be my partner. And that's the thing, that...
You mean instead of a quick fix?
Exactly.
Just fix this problem right now and then go back to normal.
That I live in permanent, ongoing, growing partnership. And that is the word that is so important, partnership. God does not want a cipher. God does not want us to be robots. God has given us free will so that we can be ourselves. And God likes, at least the God I know, likes a good argument and likes good jokes and everything.
Yes.
So you've got to ask, and you've got to ask with all your heart and all your being, because God never goes anywhere uninvited. But if you open the door and you let God in, you have to be most careful, because once the door is open and you say yes, it's not a good plan to go back, because it's like Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. It's a point of no return. You can return, but it would be at a price. There is, as you Americans would say, no such thing as a free lunch.
Well, David, this has been a most enjoyable session.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for sharing your innermost feelings and thoughts with us today on the Millennium Cafe.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.